that lightning inside me, son of a god. I'm like a titan that's rising, oh, just you watch. I'm stepping into fate, there is no time to waste. I've got that lightning inside me, this is how legends are made.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Round 6 podcast. We are your hosts, Keaton Cordell and Jake Smith, coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas and Denver, Colorado. It was a great week of fights last week for the UFC. We had UFC Fight Night, Sandhagen versus Song, and it did not disappoint. I really enjoyed watching every single fight. We had a lot of good bets out there, a lot to recap on that front. But, I mean, by all accounts, last week's card flew under the radar. It wasn't a card that, 2 months out, 3 months out, you look at and you point to and you say, man, that one's going to go off. It's going to be an absolute banger. But it turned out to be just that. We saw some great finishes. We saw some nasty cuts. We saw pretty much everything that a UFC card has to offer all in one night on a card that just at face value did not seem like it was going to be just above and beyond. And it absolutely was. I really enjoyed every fight that I watched. I think we hit a lot of our bets. We had another excellent week. And then moving forward to this week, we had the Contender Series, which was great. And how wild is it now that a 17-year-old kid is in the UFC? A time in this guy's life where most other people at his age are trying to figure out what their algebra homework is going to be, for the following week. And he's in the UFC. He's got a contract, and we saw some really great stuff out of him too. But Jake, I want to kind of turn to you in talking about UFC Fight Night, Sandhagen versus Song, and get your thoughts and your takes on some of these fights. And what did you see that stuck out to you last week?
Yeah, this is another one of those cards that it seems to be super consistent. When you have a card that seems super lackluster, it doesn't have any of the big names on it, those cards deliver every time. Like, every time you see the comments on Instagram or on Twitter saying, oh, this card sucks, no one cares about this card, every fight turns out to be an absolute banger. I mean, we ended the prelims with the Damon Jackson-Pat Sabatini fight, and that was crazy. The first-round knockout from Damon Jackson, and the story behind that one. He had just lost a family member in the past couple of weeks, so the whole story behind that was awesome. And then we moved into the main card. We saw Joe Pyfer get the knockout again. I mean, beat Joe Pyfer. I mean, Dana White said it. The guy's a beast. He got to drive Dana's Ferrari after that fight. He's living life right now. And then the last three fights were all nasty cuts, crazy fights. Andre Fili was drenched in his opponent's blood. We saw Gregory Rodriguez, RoboCop, have one of the nastiest cuts I've ever seen in my life. And then right after that, Song Yadong with yet again one of the nastiest cuts I've ever seen in my life. And it seemed like they set a precedent, too, from the co-main event that they were not going to stop the fight due to a horrible cut due to RoboCop and Song Yadong. Yeah, I mean, those are disgusting. Apparently on the top picture, you could see RoboCop's artery popping out when they're stitching him up. I mean, that sounds like one hit and possible death, right?
Yeah, I mean, the picture that Dana posted after the fight of the doctor stitching him up, like the before and after, was wild. And on the broadcast, they didn't even capture this top photo of Rodriguez in the corner getting worked on. But that photo just, to me, shows how much worse that cut was than I even thought it was. And I already thought it was horrible. And, I mean, like, you can see skull there. Like, that's as bad of a cut as I've ever seen. And it's right between the eyes. Like, you can't avoid – like, if someone's sticking a jab out there, what are you aiming at? You're aiming right there for the most part. Like,
yeah,
you can't avoid anything when you've got a cut in that spot. And it was just – I mean, by far the most – disgusting cut I've ever seen. And then like you said, you followed it up with Sandhagen versus Song. Sandhagen hits Song Yadong with like an elbow that just grazed his eyebrow, only just. But it's one of those tactical elbows to me. Like, of course, if Sandhagen gets damage out of that, great. Like, that's ultimately what you're going for. But I don't think you're mad if you just happen to graze over someone's forehead, or in this case, Song's eyebrow, and you leave them with a nasty cut. They said it on the broadcast during that fight, but oftentimes it's not the big damaging elbows that make those cuts. It's those cuts that just graze and kind of happen to split the skin open. And this cut was more or less like in Song Yadong's eye.
Yes,
And
the Tony Ferguson slice.
yeah, literally, yeah.
Knives.
And I think you brought up a good point, and I never thought about this last week, about kind of the doctor that was on hand for the UFC last weekend, and some of the refs and all involved setting a kind of a precedent for the main event after that co-main with Chidi and Jokwani and Gregory Rodriguez, because you can't have a fight like that co-main and a cut that happened, and then you see Song's cut, which is bad by like any stretch of the imagination. It's a horrible cut, but it's also not as bad as Gregory's in my mind. It's still bad, but it's not bad like that.
And the fact that Gregory came back to win after, like, this picture is in between rounds 1 and 2. Like, that we need to make clear. This picture is in between the rounds. The top picture, he comes back and wins after this. So that is why it's like, okay, what do you do here? Because if you can win with a cut like that, so can Song.
Yeah, well, and I liked what I saw out of the doctor in the octagon last week. I don't know his name, but shout out to you, Doc. You did a great job all night. You had your work cut out for you. But some doctors, it seems like when a bad cut happens, it almost seems like they go in there and just, and I get, like, you want to be cautious and you want to protect the fighters and protect them from themselves, I guess is a good way to put it. But I think what I saw out of this doctor last weekend was he was going in there, he was looking at the cuts, and there was like an open line of communication between him and the fighter as to, how are you doing? What are you feeling? And the fighter's obviously never going to lay down and quit. But at the same time, if it's not greatly affecting your vision and the cut's not a serious threat to your well-being in the long run, let them fight, and we saw just that. And obviously in Gregory Rodriguez's situation, it proved to be the difference, and he went on to win the fight. And, Chidi had kind of gassed himself trying to go after a finish, and I don't really blame him for that. But then in Song's case, he just kind of ran out of time. And I don't think there's many bantamweights that are just going to outpace Corey Sandhagen. Like, Corey Sandhagen's, like, flow and the volume of strikes that he throws is just unreal. And the crazy thing is, if he hits you in the right spot with one of those, like, he does have knockout power. But ultimately, like, pound for pound, I think Corey's one of those guys that really oftentimes wins just on sheer volume and his ability to break his opponents. Like, you don't see anything left from any of his opponents that go more than like 3 to 5 rounds with him, because they're all mentally broken in those fights that he wins. So I love what I see out of Corey. He's still coming up, and I think we're really at this point set up for a great scrap at the top of the bantamweight division, and I'm excited to see what his next step is.
Yeah, so going off of that, there's pretty much only 3 guys at the top of the bantamweight division that are not booked up, and I feel like 2 of them are going to be matched up. It's Corey, it's Merab, and it's Cheeto. I think every fan wants to see Corey and Cheeto. I think Merab is going to get the short end of the straw here. Because nobody wants to fight Merab, Corey doesn't want that fight. Cheeto doesn't want that fight. These are 2 strikers that would match up amazing with each other. That'd be a very fan-friendly fight. Nobody wants that pressure of Merab. Nobody wants that wrestling of Merab. Like you just said yourself, I don't think anybody can keep up with the pace of Corey. I don't think Corey can keep up with the pace of Merab.
That's fair.
That is a different pace. That is a different machine. Like, he is literally a machine. So what do you do in that division? Like, where does Merab go? Where does Merab fit into all this?
Well, I don't personally, and I love Merab as much as anyone. You and I have both been huge Merab fans since he got signed off of Dana White looking for a fight. But I don't think Merab really did himself any favors in his last fight. As good of a fight as I thought it was, it just didn't help him, advance at all. I think, if anything, it kind of stagnated him a little bit, in that he probably needs, another fight with someone of similar stance and stature as his last fight. And to me, realistically, I think you've got to go with the Corey versus Cheeto fight. Like, there's no other fight that makes sense there. And you hit the nail on the head perfectly in saying that stylistically it's a great matchup because both of them are strikers. In this last fight with Corey, it almost kind of seemed like he was taking a page out of Piotr Jan's book, and he started a little bit slower, kind of in an attempt to feel out his opponent and stuff. So to me, that's a fight that if it gets booked, probably just knowing how both of those guys start out of the gate, first round, second round, going to be good rounds, but it's going to be like kind of time for them to feel each other out. And then when that third round hits, man, it's going to be a war, and it's going to be just an insane fight. So I think that's definitely the one you book there. And I think you're right in saying Merab's probably going to get the short end of the stick and end up on the outside looking in here. So I don't really know what you do with Merab, to be quite honest. It's kind of one of those situations where you've got a guy that's, unfortunate as it may be, just someone that's, like I said, on the outside looking in, and he's going to have to wait for the division to kind of open up a little bit and find the right opponent.
Yeah, unless he's willing to fight, and I mean, when I say fight down, I mean fight way, way, way down. He's not getting a fight until the loser of Aljamain and Dillashaw, more than likely, or the loser of Piotr Jan and Sean. Like there's nothing out there for him. Like there's really nothing out there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, and I don't think there's kind of two sides to this because obviously Aljamain is a wrestler, but obviously those two don't have any plans to see each other inside the octagon anytime soon or at all. But the bantamweight division is kind of scarce for wrestlers. Like it's pretty striking heavy, which isn't a bad thing. I think that's why it's kind of emerged as one of the fan favorite divisions and one of the most exciting divisions to watch in the UFC. But Merab needs someone that's not afraid of that wrestling, and not that any of those guys are afraid. Like that's probably not the right word to put there. But he would need to me someone that is very confident in their takedown defense, which we saw out of Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo was a good match for that because his takedown defense historically throughout the course of his career has been unbelievable. But you need someone that's not going to be afraid of the pressure and what he brings to the table, and is going to be willing to take it to him.
Yeah, like looking at the rankings right now, he's far down the list, very far down the list, sitting at 13. But I would definitely love to see Merab and Umar Nurmagomedov go against each other. That would be a scrap on the ground.
No doubt.
That if Umar can get one, maybe two more wins in like a short amount of time, sure, that could be an awesome fight. But I mean, yeah, again, there's just nothing for Merab at the top of the division.
Yeah, but ultimately, kind of walking it back here, Corey Sandhagen, Cheeto Vera, insane fight. I'd love to see it happen. But let's kind of transition here into the betting side of last week's card. We had another great week. If you're out there and you're not taking us serious, it's probably about time to wake up and start taking us serious, because we had a great week. Again, this might have been, with the exception being the UFC Paris card, this might have been the best card we've had since we started doing this.
By far.
So Jake, you want to kind of take us through what we've got there? You were doing a good job of tracking our units for last week's card, and I really like doing that. And we're going to start tracking units moving forward. But Jake, take us through it.
Yeah. So the way we got this number from is what we're doing from now on is we're going to do a $10 unit. So you can adjust the unit size. You can adjust all that for what you're doing. But the way we're doing it is $100 will be our max bet ever. So you're never doing more than $100. So 10 units on that. So our hammer of the week will always be our max bet. 10 units, $100, throw it down. Our dog of the week is always going to be 4 units. And then our parlay and all of our regular picks will be 1 unit. So when using those numbers, this week we came up a little over 9 units, that's a crazy number. That's actually a crazy number. So looking at our picks, we did seem to lose on the Bozer Nascimento under, as well as the Boschrot by KO or sub. But the two we hit, Andre Philly money line, Jillian Robertson by submission, both pretty much even money line bets. Corey Sandhagen, we throw 10 units down. That is a massive payout off that money line. And then for our dog of the week, we had 4 units down on a plus 185 dog. That's just about doubling your money. So this was a massive week for us.
Yeah, and the thing I love most about that Jackson Sabatini fight is that you and I, in talking about our bets beforehand, like as soon as we saw some lines for that fight, we were like, bang, that's the one. Like we were attacking that fight in some way or another, and I'm just glad we did it the right way.
I remember looking through the both of their records, finishes. It's like one of them I'm pretty sure had one fight go to a decision in ever. Yeah. So it's just like, how is this plus 185 for under 2.5 rounds? Like this fight is not going the distance. And then you watch the fight, it doesn't even leave the first round. Like it was the second a connection happened, Damon Jackson was all over Sabatini, and then he got that finish. I mean, I was going nuts.
Yeah, well, and as soon as they announced on the broadcast that I think it was his brother had passed away like 5 days before he fought, I was like, oh, Damon Jackson's getting a huge win here. Yeah, like, there was no doubt that he was getting a big win. And so, yeah, that was the pick of – it wasn't one of our picks of the week, but that was the pick of the week for me. Like when that fight started, I was like, here we go. I mean, I was locked into that one. That was a great fight.
Mm-hmm. And then our parlay just got absolutely screwed by Zelluber. But Canelo got the win and Pfeiffer got the win. We just missed it on yet another minus 400 favorite.
How does that happen? Like, and I understand, like, Zellhuber's line was inflated because he's only fought in Mexico and he's just out there starching dudes in Mexico. And I think I want to say it was Paul Felder that said on the broadcast that like you kind of get that false sense of confidence if you're only fighting in one country and fighting people from that one country, because it's almost like a big fish in a small pond kind of situation. And then when you get to the UFC, it's like, oh, I've got a whole nother level of talent and ability here. But that one made me mad because I was so confident in his money line just based on everything that I'd heard about him coming out of Mexico. But, I mean, it's proof that the UFC is the highest level of this game. And, you know, shout out to Trey Ogden for getting it done. What can you say? You know, and he fought a great fight. It's not like that fight was close. Trey Ogden was like, it was like a 30-27 easily, I think. I don't think there's any question about that fight. So
no, not at all.
Is what it is. We'll bounce back. Have a good parlay next week. We got to get another one to hit. Parlays are my favorite, man.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we'll bounce back. Don't worry about that. We'll bounce back. It's not like we need to bounce back anyway. Now that we're starting unit counts, we are officially up 9.36 units. We're not going to take it. We're not going to go back and look at all the past events just because we didn't have units put out. We weren't saying what we were going to do. But from now on, you know what the unit size is, what we're putting on each bet. And so now we can track from here on and just see how much money we can make by the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move forward. Since we don't have a card this week, we decided that we would play a game instead. So Jake and I have found 2 tattoos each that are either horrible or our favorite or whatever the case may be, tattoos in the UFC, and we're going to try to guess whose tattoos are whose. So Jake, you want to start us off? Whose tattoo do you have first?
Yeah, so here we go. First off, one of the worst tattoos I have seen in UFC history. I mean, one of the absolute worst. That
one's horrible.
And not giving them away. Big fighter, we'll say over 170 pounds.
Okay.
And I'll just leave it at that. He's had a big knockout, big finish this year.
Yeah, this one's a horrible one. I mean, like, just looking at it, like, it looks like someone in like a middle school art class drew the thumbs up. But that one's tough because I know I've seen it before, but there's 2 people that are stuck in my mind, and I don't think it's one of them. But see, okay, here's where I'm hung up, and this isn't my final guess, but this is what I'm going to say. I think it's Jamal Hill, but I'm not positive. But I also thought Jamal Hill had like Sweet Dreams tattooed across his chest or something, and I don't think this says Sweet Dreams.
That does not say Sweet Dreams.
So that's where I'm hung up. And I can't remember who. I know I've seen this tattoo, but I can't remember who else it might be. So even though I think I might be wrong because of the Sweet Dreams thing, I'm going to say Jamal Hill. Is it Jamal Hill?
It's Jamal Hill.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, I was nervous about that. I thought he had the Sweet Dreams like tattooed across the chest.
Jamal Hill with the massive knockout of Johnny Walker in his last outing. Good God.
Yeah. That tattoo is horrible. I wouldn't say that to Jamal Hill's face. No chance. But if I saw him in public, I'd say it's the coolest tattoo I've ever seen. But,
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll get into my first one here for you, and we'll throw it up on screen. So here's my first one. This is one of my – actually, I'm going to start with a different one. This is one of my favorite bad tattoos in the UFC.
Oh!
And it's pretty classic. It's pretty easy. Starting off pretty easy. It's not
Just
too
say you're
difficult.
giving it way too easy for me.
Way too easy, but I couldn't not choose this one because it is so bad. Like, so bad.
Totally honest, I almost used this tattoo because of how bad it is.
It's horrible.
I mean, Darren Elkins all day long. The damage. He lives and breathes that tattoo. That is literally who he is.
It's so bad.
It's
so bad.
My favorite part about this picture too is that it's covered in blood.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like mid-fight, but
yeah, he's got blood all over his body. It's just who he is. It's just Darren Elkins.
Yeah, no doubt. But that's I know that one was easy, and I didn't think you would have any difficulty at all getting it.
You gotta throw that up there.
But you gotta put that if you're talking UFC tattoos, you gotta put Darren the Damage Elkins in there. So that was my first one. I think you might have a little bit of a tougher time on the second one, but for the time being.
I'm hoping you're going to have a tougher time on this second one because I really liked the second one.
Okay. What's your second tattoo here? What you got?
All right, pulling it up. We have the full sleeve, but we're only doing a little part of that sleeve. I'm not going to tell you where this is on the body. I have it very zoomed in, but we'll leave it as a very detailed tattoo.
Yeah,
on a very tall human being. Yeah. So I'm looking at the tattoo, and I know I've seen it before, but I'm going to take all of the elements of this picture that I have into account and kind of work with what I've been presented here. I tried to really zoom in.
So this is how I'm going to narrow this one down. If the top of this photo is this fighter's shorts, there is not many guys that I know in the UFC that wear shorts that short. Mm-hmm. Like the UFC shorts. I'm sure there's a couple, but there's not many. So I think this is a woman.
Okay.
And there's only one woman in the UFC that's got a leg sleeve this insane. So I'm going to say this is Megan Anderson.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a great one. Her tattoos are amazing. Like
her tattoos are unbelievable. Like actually unbelievable.
And I think it's such a double-edged sword in the UFC from the standpoint of like some fighters like Darren Elkins and Jamal Hill and my next one are just the worst tattoos you've ever seen. And then there's also like the Dustin Poiriers and the Megan Andersons and some of them. TJ Dillashaw has great tattoos.
A fight we were just talking about would be a fight between two of the best tattoos in the UFC, Corey Sandhagen and Cheeto Vera. That back piece on Corey, and then Cheeto is covered head to toe, literally head to toe. He just got his head done with that scorpion. He's got the full leg sleeve now. I know Cheeto gets his tattoos done, but I can't remember that artist's name. But he charges like $20,000 an hour or something.
Oh, wow.
It's absurd. Yeah,
they better be good.
I was gonna use fighters like Sean Brady too, but I was like, he's gonna guess this, or Volkov's back. It's like, he's gonna guess this easily.
Volkov's back is wild because it used to be like that stingray, and then he got a cover up done on it, and now it's like that samurai mask. It's kind of like Sean Brady's actually.
Yeah, very similar.
All right, so here's my second and final tattoo. So you'll notice a theme on my tattoos. I did not pick good tattoos. I picked two of my favorite bad tattoos ever in the UFC. So I'll give you a little hint. I'll go ahead and put it on screen so you can see it. But I'll give you a hint here. So obviously it's a man, but it's an older fighter who's no longer in the UFC. This was like an early 2010s era fighter. And just for anyone that might not understand what they're looking at here, because it's such a bad tattoo, yes, your eyes do not deceive you. That is Johnny Cash on a man's arm. And it is so bad. This is a tougher one,
tattoo.
even though this is an iconic bad tattoo.
I was gonna say I've seen this tattoo before. I remember looking up like a UFC worst tattoos video or something like that. And Dana White's looking at this one. He's just like, "What? Like, who gets this?" But
well, it's like if you can get a tattoo of Johnny Cash if it's a good tattoo of Johnny Cash. But this is just awful. Any guesses? This one's tougher just because it's not a super well known fighter. But
yeah, I don't know the name of the fighter.
To me, the only reason that Alan Belcher is well known is because of this tattoo. So that's Alan Belcher. Yep.
Nuts.
It's terrible. But I knew that one would be tough just because he's not like a famous fighter. But how can you not put that tattoo in there?
That is probably the worst tattoo in the UFC.
I can't think of any that are worse. Even some of the bad ones, like Darren Elkins, at least has a meaning behind it. Like you just got like a watercolor picture of Johnny Cash drawn on your arm. Like that's bad. That's bad.
That's so bad. Like
yeah, yep. All right, so moving forward, love the tattoo game. We'll have to revisit that at some point in the year, and maybe even in the future, come up with, like you had mentioned, a good all-time tattoo fight. So we might have to put a fight card together based on tattoos, which I think would be fun. But moving forward, Jake and I have both put together lists of our top 3 finishes and our top 3 fights of 2022. So we're going to revisit those real quick and take a look and kind of see some of the good fights and some of the good finishes that we've had so far in 2022. I think there's been a lot to choose from. But Jake, you want to go ahead and get us started with your top 3 finishes in 2022?
Yeah, for sure. So starting at number 3, I'm going to go with Josh Quinlan versus Jason Witt in the first round knockout. This was one of the nastiest knockouts of the year, by far, in my opinion. He caught him with the left hook, and Jason Witt just falls back completely out cold. And here comes Quinlan for the big follow-up shot and just stops. Like, he had the wherewithal to know the ref is stopping this fight. This was a walk-off KO. But when you watch that fight, when you watch that knockout, I mean, that is as clean of a walk-off KO as you get. I mean, out cold, straight from the hit. So,
yep.
So at number 3, we're going Quinlan versus Jason Witt. And then moving on to number 2, I'm going to go with, let's go with Chito Vera against Dominic Cruz. 1 and 2 is very tough for me, but I'm gonna stick with Chito versus Dom. I mean, like we showed that knockout on this podcast a couple weeks ago. We showed the picture with Dom's nose flattening from that foot. The view they show in slow motion of Chito's foot coming up and Dom slipping straight into the kick is, oh my god, just disgusting. Because you watch his nose literally break in slow motion. Like you see every bit of it break. So sitting at number 2, absolutely going to be Chito Vera. And then moving on to number 1. I mean, I don't think anybody can argue with the number 1. There is a number 1 knockout of the year, and it is Michael Chandler front kicking Tony Ferguson straight to hell. I mean, that's one of the best. That is the best front kick I've ever seen. That beats the Chito front kick against Frankie Edgar. That beats the Anderson Silva Vitor Belfort front kick. There's nothing that beats this one. That is, it was barely even a front teep. It wasn't even that. He punted Tony Ferguson's head straight out of the arena. Like that was just a crazy knockout to me.
Yeah, no, that was insane. I think those are all 3 great picks there, and I might have a little similarity in my list here as well. So for my top 3 finishes of 2022. I'm going number 3, Ilia Topuria versus Jai Herbert. This fight happened back in March on the first UFC London card. I was in Vegas watching this, and I had a pretty good amount of money on Ilia Topuria, and he looked about as bad as you can look in the first round of that fight. And he comes out in the second round and just starts throwing some vicious combos, catches Jai Herbert with a couple of them. But Jai Herbert was very much still in this fight, and then all of a sudden, Ilia comes in, throws a couple rips to the body, one hand right hand right over the top, and just puts Jai Herbert out cold. So for me, not only was that a great knockout, but I was also in Vegas and had money on Ilia Topuria. So for me, it's just that much better. Number 2, and I think this is one that kind of snuck in there. But again, love the knockout and how it happened, and I think it's beautiful for what it is. But this one's also cool for me because you and I were here in person for this one in Houston. So I'm going Tai Tuivasa knocking out Derek Lewis. I love Derek Lewis as much as anyone, but the way Tai just started running through Derek in that second round there was just amazing. And then he throws one of the shortest elbows I've ever seen and puts Derek on his face. So as much as I hate to see Derek Lewis get knocked out, because who likes to see Derek Lewis get knocked out, I also love to see Tai Tuivasa get a win, especially a big knockout and one that we were there in person for. So for that reason, number 2, Tai Tuivasa over Derek Lewis.
There
it is.
Four right there.
Yeah, there we go. And then my number 1, how can you not? You said it right. Is also Michael Chandler over Tony Ferguson. Chandler just sent Tony Ferguson to the shadow realm. So I don't know what more there is to say about that one. So that was my top 3 finishes of 2022. And moving on, last segment here, top 3 fights of 2022. It wouldn't shock me, Jake, if there's some similarity between ours because there's just been some of those fights that are just clear-cut winners over the rest.
Yeah.
But what do you have as your top 3 fights of 2022?
Yeah, so number 3, this is pretty much the only one on my list that didn't go the distance, or at least did not go to the last round. But for the little bit of the fight that we did see, craziest fight of the year. Drew Dober and Terrence McKinney. I mean, these are 2 fighters, when they come out, it's going to be a brawl every time. Drew Dober is so electric. Terrence McKinney, so electric. McKinney doesn't get out of the first round ever. He's either getting knocked out or he's knocking somebody out. In this fight, we basically saw both. We saw Terrence McKinney come out super hot, knock Drew Dober down. Oh, it depends on the ref, honestly. Some refs could have stopped it. Others let it go. This one was let go. Dober was able to hold on to a leg, survive for about a minute, and then he turned the fight around and did the same thing back to McKinney. Ends up getting the knockout in the first round. But this was literally 2 knockouts in 5 minutes. Like, this was just an absolute madness of a fight. So, sitting at number 3, I'm absolutely going Drew Dober and Terrence McKinney. Number 2, Hamzat and Burns. That was a crazy fight. A lot of people wanted to give that to Burns. Watching it over a couple times, no, absolutely not. It goes Hamzat, Burns, Hamzat, absolutely. Hamzat, I think some people want to give Burns round 1. No chance in my mind. Absolutely 0 chance. Hamzat dominated rounds 1 and 3. And then just the fact that it turned into the fight that it turned into, where these guys were no longer thinking about fighting. These guys were no longer doing anything smart. Gilbert is on his back, throwing hammer fists up in the air instead of protecting his head, while Hamzat is also hammer fisting down. Like, these guys were going for the knockout at every turn of this fight. This was just an absolute war. I don't think anything. This was just an absolute war. And then sitting at number 1, I'm going with Glover versus Yuri. That fight was crazy. I personally had money on Glover. I thought he was going to do it. I thought the old man could get it done. And it looked like we were running to a decision for him. And then here comes Yuri, which is the rear naked choke out of hell. No hooks in, and somehow still manages to get the squeeze strong enough to tap out the 205-pound champion. So, number 1, I'm going to give it to Yuri Prochazka. That was fight of the year, in my opinion. We still have a quarter of the year left to go, so obviously these are mid to late end of year awards, but as of right now, I don't think anything's beaten Yuri Prochazka's win over Glover.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that one also made my top 3. So my top 3 fights for this year so far, number 3, Burns versus Hamzat. I think you're right in saying that fight, just game plans went out the window, and it just became a street fight, more or less. But those are some of the best fights that we see. And kind of the theme for my top 3 best fights, and this is something that I truly believe makes a great fight and a memorable fight, are fights in which both guys or girls have a chance to win. Like, they both at some point or another have their opponent hurt and therefore have a chance to win the fight and put it away. Obviously, sometimes in these it's multiple times per person, but that's kind of the theme for all 3 of mine for this year. So number 3, Burns versus Chimaev. Both of these guys had each other hurt at one point or another in the fight, and it just turned out to be an awesome fight and just an all-out war. Number 2 for me is Cyril Gane versus Ty, kind of for the same reasons. We saw Cyril obviously had kind of the edge in that fight, but Ty's the first guy to ever put Cyril Gane down, so how can, for me at least, especially as a heavyweight fight and in a fight that no one thought Ty had any chance, for him to come out there and get some respect, for people to really see that he belongs at the top of the heavyweight division, that he's not just a brawler. That was huge for me, and I think that fight was crazy. I remember watching that in my office before we had a game that night and I had to go work, and I was just going insane. I ended up having to close the door in my office because I was being so loud. So that fight was wild. And then number 1 for me, still exact same as you, Yuri Prochazka and Glover Teixeira. Like, if you aren't a UFC fan, or if you know someone that's not a UFC fan and you want to make them one, that's the fight you show them. Like I remember watching that in the office too, after a game with some of my friends that weren't UFC fans. And my friend Seth is actually now just the biggest Yuri Prochazka fan ever because of the samurai situation and the fact that he ends up winning that fight and doing it via rear naked choke, and not even a good looking rear naked choke. He just went for a kind of a Hail Mary sub to avoid going to the scorecards. And he gets it done. He chokes out Glover Teixeira, one of the better jiu-jitsu practitioners pound for pound, like in the UFC's history. So that was a crazy fight to me. But yeah, that's my top 3. I think they're all amazing.
I was going to say, that's a great point too, because I think Yuri Prochazka made more casual fans in that fight than any fight in the entire year so far. I think I have heard more about Yuri in that fight than any other newcomer, basically. I think he has all of the casual fans on his side after that one. I know I went and watched it with my roommates and some of my friends, people that don't really care about UFC that much. All of them were obsessed with Yuri after that. Seeing the hair, seeing his style, his fight style, like just everything about him. He made so many new fans. So, like, that fight alone made quite an impact for him.
Yeah, no, it absolutely did. I love
saving the belt.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but I love Yuri, definitely. So those are our top 3 fights. We obviously did our top 3 finishes, played some Guess That Tattoo, obviously all in place of us putting our bets in because, sad face, there's no card this weekend. So got to wait till October 1st.
Saturday now.
Just football. Maybe we put out some football picks. Who knows?
Yes.
Stay tuned.
Sucks, right?
Yeah, it does. It really does.
Saturday without UFC, I'm literally just looking around like, what the hell do I do today?
You're just staring at the wall. Like,
yeah.
Maybe we'll try UFC tomorrow.
I was going to say, maybe I'll just rewatch some old ones probably.
Yeah, hey, never a bad option. But yeah, so if you guys have any tattoos that you love or you hate, send them in. I'd love to see y'all's thoughts. Same thing, top 3 finishes, top 3 fights. If anyone out there has opinions on any of those fights, send them our way. We'd love to talk about them. And maybe there's some that we missed. I'm sure there are. But those are just our opinions on those. But I think that about wraps us up for this week. Had a lot of fun doing this one. I love playing the little side games. They're always fun. But, Jake, you have anything else you want to say before we sign off here?
I think that's about it. Just ready to get back into some live UFC action.
Yeah, ready to get the bets going again. Mm-hmm. So we'll be back at you guys next week with a full slate of bets. We'll be kind of previewing this upcoming card. It's going to be Mackenzie Dern versus Yan Xiaonan on October 1st. So we got some time to wait, but the good news for us is that means we've got some time to put these bets in and really find some solid picks to keep this hot streak rolling. But I think that about does it for us this week. So make sure you go follow us on Instagram at Round6Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube page. We'll be posting clips. We'll be posting all of our bets. You don't want to miss any of it. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to make some money together. So without further ado, we'll see y'all next Friday. Y'all have a good one.